It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object there was none, passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. One of his eyes resembled that of a vulture. Pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, little by little, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Edgar Allan Poe. Telltale Heart. Hello, my fellow inner children. I am Dawn, and this is Inner Child Creates, where we test the theory that freeing your inner child also frees your creativity. So if you're new to this channel, I listen to my inner child, who we have so often lost touch with, and I let her lead me on an adventure and see what creative endeavors follow. But lately, my inner child has been trying to get me killed. We all know that there are few things more captivating to a child than a good ghost story, and my inner child wants to hear one, but not the kind we can get from a book. No, she has decided to lead me into a house teeming with malevolent dead spirits. So here I go. Send help.
Today, my inner child has brought me to Vicksburg, Mississippi, which you might be able to guess is a little town nestled along the Mississippi River. The reason my inner child wanted to come here is because it is a little town full of history, and my inner child is a little bit of a history buff. Not the boring kind that you get from a textbook, but the living, breathing kind that creates a really good ghost tale. And Vicksburg is definitely known for its ghosts. It's rich in history and is rather haunted. So, in inner child fashion, maybe, just maybe, one of these ghost stories will be the inspiration for a tall tale.
So let's ease into this just a little bit with a backstory and some history before the creepy, before the downright macabre. Vicksburg is the site for hundreds, maybe even thousands of ghost stories. It was the site of the Siege of Vicksburg, one of the most decisive, brutal, and protracted battles of the American Civil War. Ulysses S. Grant had determined that Vicksburg was the key to the South, meaning if he could topple it, he could gain control of one of the most important parts of the Confederacy and access to the Mississippi River. What happened next was a 48-day siege of the city, from May 18th to July 4th of 1863. During that time, many of the citizens hid in caves, starving, cut off from food and supplies, while their homes were either destroyed or converted into hospitals for the dying and dead. From history, we know they lost. What they gained was thousands and thousands of ghosts. 32,000, in fact. But is that the only reason Vicksburg is so haunted? Maybe it goes back further to when Andrew Jackson enacted the Indian Removal Act of 1830, otherwise known as the Trail of Tears, named such as thousands of natives perished on the journey of forced migration. The routes crisscrossed the state of Mississippi, and historical records show that at least the Choctaw and Seminole, but probably also the Creek and Chickasaw peoples, were all forced through what had just been incorporated as Vicksburg only 5 years prior. And what about the fate of all the countless enslaved people? The stories we encounter today are of the members of Vicksburg's society, but who's to say it didn't start long before that? Just a few of the purportedly most haunted locations in Vicksburg include the courthouse, the Old Depot, the Vicksburg National Military Park, Christ Episcopal Church, the Nurses Station, Anchuka, the Duff Green Mansion, and McRaven.
So behind me you will see the beautiful Bear House. It was built in the mid-1800s and now it's a bread and breakfast. It's where I'm going to be staying tonight. And I'm looking forward to it because you can see it's a truly lovely house. But it also looks a little haunted. What do you think? Do you think I'll see some ghosts tonight?
The Bear House was originally built by wealthy merchant brothers Abraham and Lazarus Bear in 1870. Lazarus's bride, Leona Bloom, purchased the property and created the design concept in the Eastlake style, which, as it was a Yankee thing, was fairly uncommon for that area. The Bears incorporated their Jewish heritage, seen in this slightly disguised menorah in the glass carving of the window, and shins on every doorway. The wainscoting is comprised of individual handmade walnut, chestnut, and mahogany elements. While the entire home is exquisite, the flooring is probably the most unique detail, alternating between black walnut and American chestnut, thus irreplaceable since American chestnut is now functionally extinct.
I am in for the night and ready for bed. And that's probably a good thing because I don't know if you can hear it, but we're having a pretty good thunderstorm. Lots of thunder and lightning. No sightings yet, but definitely we have set the ambiance. I just wanted to give you a little view of my sleeping chambers. It's very beautiful. Very interesting. Now, I don't know the history of this house yet, and maybe that's a good thing. I'm not sure. Today, when I went to the Duff Green Mansion, the tour guide asked if anyone was staying in a particular room. This couple raised their hand. The lady said, yes, that's our room. And so the tour guide asked, are you checking out today, or do you have another night to sleep in there? The lady said, we've checked out this morning. The tour guide responds with, oh, good. I can tell the story then. She proceeds to explain how Duff Green had designated the house as a field hospital during the siege of Vicksburg, and he designated it for both Confederate and Union soldiers, knowing that if Union soldiers were housed within the home on the property, that it would protect the home itself as well as the neighboring church from being shelled. So the two upper floors were for Union soldiers. Now that upper floor had been the private chambers of Duff Green and his wife, And the master bedroom was up there, of course. So this was the room that this couple was sleeping in last night. And while it was a field hospital, they had a makeshift surgical unit right in the entryway to the upstairs. And they started using the master bedroom as a place to store the discarded, amputated appendages. And then when too many people started dying, it became the makeshift Union morgue. You should have seen that lady's face. So, maybe it's good not to know all the history beforehand. So, definitely a good thunderstorm, but no sightings yet, which is a good thing because I need some sleep. And we'll see what adventures await tomorrow. Good night.
As with most of the wealthiest households in Vicksburg, the Bear House was designed for entertaining. Originally, there was a continuous 83-foot ballroom with 4 matching fireplaces featuring pink marble and 5 matching chandeliers. Inexplicably, though, the Bears kept all 4 of their children sequestered to the 2nd floor, even having a staircase dedicated to keeping them separate from the high society guests that often frequented the lavish parties that Leona hosted. Leona arranged her daughters' marriages, and when one of them, named Sarah, refused and eloped, Leona had a symbolic funeral for the disobedient young lady. Leona preceded her husband to the grave, and after meeting his grandchildren by coincidence on the street one day, he and Sarah finally reconciled. But after his death, not one of the Bear children wanted anything to do with the house, nor with their mother's beloved belongings. So it passed from owner to owner until its current owners turned it into a bed and breakfast. Some people still claim that Leona walks the striped floors of her beloved home, but others disagree.
So, the only paranormal activity seems to be the slight pulse in these chandeliers here in the bathroom. Now, I don't know if you can see it in the video, but there's just a slight flicker. Fortunately, being a lighting designer, I know that old electrical systems just tend to have those flickers, right?
Nowadays, Patricia and Corey Rickroad keep the home impeccably furnished and decorated with beautiful art while graciously serving a diverse and steady guest list. And although Leona's story is known, it's not commonly believed that she lingers. Let's just say that house's reputation is not for being haunted. And if I'm honest, that's part of the reason I decided to stay there, because I can visit a haunted house, but I have no desire to sleep in one. That cannot be said for the ghosts of our next house. And the last, well, no one sleeps there. That morgue room that I mentioned is at the Duff Green Mansion, and it is commonly reported to house a soldier who is seen holding his amputated leg. By commonly reported, I mean 70 people. 70 people have claimed to have seen him. But nobody really seems to be afraid in the home. That is, supposedly only 2 guests have ever left in the middle of the night, unless you believe social media comments, in which case more than one person has claimed to be one of the 2 people. But first, let's go back and talk about the Green family. I am met by a guide in antebellum costume, and her personality is as big as her hoop skirt, with Southern charm, she starts to bring the Green family to life. Duff was savvy. In fact, there's never an example to the contrary. In 1847, Duff's brother told him of a fortune waiting to be made brokering cotton. That year, a 20-something Duff Green arrived in Vicksburg and began learning how to do just that. Soon, he found himself successful, very successful. The Meridian Railroad in the Mississippi meant that Vicksburg was the epicenter of global transport of this highly prized product. And Duff was one of the best. Duff fell in love with Mary Green, daughter of the respected Judge Lake. So Duff got up the courage and went to go ask Judge Lake for Mary's hand in marriage. Judge Lake not only agreed to the union, but he also gifted the couple a piece of land right by his home as a wedding gift. In 1852, the couple got married, and Duff set to work to make his and Mary's dreams come true. He wanted a home of grandeur, built to entertain and impress, and he wanted all the most modern amenities. 15.5 feet ceilings accommodated one of the first coal-burning furnaces, created effective ventilation for the hot summer months, and gave the 40-foot home its impressive look. He had the first gasoliers, which were chandeliers outfitted with gas, but he was strategic about fire mitigation and had the structure made 3 bricks deep. There was a grand ballroom with fireplaces made with imported Italian Carrara marble. To do all of this, he employed the best general contractor in the region, who happened to be a, quote, free person of color. As progressive as that was, both Duff and the contractor owned enslaved people. It is safe to say that the opulence of this home was built by those hands. The first 7 years in the home were times of lavish entertainment, happiness, and wealth acquisition. The grand balls at the Duff Green Mansion were the envy of the entire state of Mississippi, and perhaps even beyond. Dinners with 6 to 14 courses were formal, plentiful, and often, always in the style of the English gentry, as that was the inspiration for Southern high culture.
Everyone envied an invitation to the Green family events. Duff and Mary were ecstatic to learn that they were about to have their first child. Soon, Mary gave birth to a little girl, and they named her Annie, after Mary's mom, Annie Lake. Annie was a vibrant, healthy little girl who was loved by her parents and everyone that knew her. Annie was a daddy's girl who especially looked up to Duff. Each evening, when it was time for bed, he would hoist her up onto his shoulder and take her up the stairs for her bedtime story. The Green family had an idyllic life.
Unfortunately, about the time that Annie would turn 5, the Green's luck would turn, especially for Mary, and it would never really turn back. Judge Lake was now a congressman in the U.S. House of Representatives, but believing that the South was about to secede, decided to run for Mississippi Congress instead. He won his election, but not without a nasty dispute between him and his opponent. The dispute was resolved by a duel. Judge Lake is the last known death by duel. Right around that same time, adorable little Annie, now age 5, contracted yellow fever and died. And now comes the war. May 18th, 1863, the Union Army laid siege to the city of Vicksburg. No one could go out or in. Supplies were cut off. The shelling was heavy. In fact, the Greens' home got hit 5 times. That's when Duff brokered another deal, one that would save his home. He converted it to a hospital, housing Union soldiers on the top floor and Confederates below. That way, he knew he would spare the house from the shelling. But staying in the home was out of the question. So he and Mary, now quite pregnant, decided to take Mary's family, her mom and her younger siblings, and retreat to the caves where about 200 other civilians were sheltering from the shelling. There, on the heaviest night of bombardment, Mary went into labor. She delivered a healthy baby boy, and they named him William Lake Siege Green. He would be known as Siege. Somewhere around this same time, Duff ordered his imported ornate side balconies to be removed from the home and melted down into mini cannonballs that he gifted to General Pemberton. He kept the front and the back intact, thus preserving the look of the home, but garnering favor with the Confederacy. It is suspected, though, that he hedged his bets at the same time, and he brokered cotton to the north. This seems to be revealed when the siege ended, and he was the first civilian to sign the Oath of Allegiance to the U.S., having already negotiated a 3-year lease on the mansion to house federal soldiers. He was then assigned the post of Wharf Master, which was a governmental assignment. Needless to say, he was no longer popular, but he was able to pay his taxes in U.S. dollars and therefore keep his home, as Confederate money is now worthless. While federal soldiers lived in their home, Duff and Mary lived with Mary's mom. While living with her mom, they had their 3rd child, a daughter they also named Annie. They named her after her grandmother and her sister. Finally, they got back into their home, and things seemed to be looking up. Unfortunately for them, it was not meant to be. One afternoon, Siege, their only son, was right out in front of the home when he was ran over and violently killed by a runaway horse carriage. Then, Duff, age 55, became intensely ill and died suddenly. Poor Mary tried her best to carry on with her now teenage daughter Annie. But tragically, one day while Annie was getting ready for an event, she excitedly put her hat on and accidentally pricked herself with the hat pin. Of course, she thought little of it, but within 10 days, she too was dead of blood poisoning. Poor Mary went back to live with her mom and sold the house. But she had to look at it every day, as well as listen to the voices of children and their laughter as she saw her new neighbors grow. We cannot assume to know her state of mind, but we can imagine how we would feel. To this day, Mary walks the halls, perhaps remembering her favorite events. It is said that she is joined by a minimum of 10 other spirits. Men, and only men of a specific description, experience a tug on the back of their pants as they try to ascend the stairs. Then they feel a pressure on their right shoulder as if hoisting a little child.
Could this be Annie looking for her dad to carry her up to hear her favorite bedtime story?
Sometimes the echo of a ball bouncing down the same staircase is heard. Guests peek their head out of their room to see what little child is laughing, but they see none. Remember, little Annie was from a happier time, before the siege. During the siege, The blood ran so freely off of the amputation tables that it remains in the floorboards to this day. While the young soldier, holding his leg, is said to just stare blankly ahead, we have to wonder how many screams these walls held. About 40 years ago, during some basic excavation, workers accidentally uncovered bones with clear saw markings. The bones were then taken and buried at a local funeral home. Another ghost is that of an enslaved woman who served as the cook. Very little is documented about her life, but what we do know is that she hung herself in the kitchen, and she is said to be one of the current occupants. And what about Mary? A former owner swore that he saw her plain as day floating in the doorway dressed in a green, formal antebellum gown. A former breakfast cook shared her experience that as she was cooking one morning, she felt someone take a hold of her shoulders from behind as if to give a little massage. She spun around expecting to see one of her coworkers, but there was no one. Later that day, she saw Mary wearing a formal green antebellum gown. She said that Mary was blonde and beautiful. Keep in mind, there are no known documented photos of Duff or Mary Green. As it has for the last 200 years, the train still makes its nightly trek along the southern edge of the McRaven property, howling an occasional metal-on-metal, blood-chilling wail. The land itself feels more like a cemetery than the lawns of a stately home. Mississippi has a humid climate, and the ground can become waterlogged during particularly wet seasons. And here, when it does, it's not uncommon for a bone or two to start rising up from the muck. Unlike at the Duff Green Mansion, where the few bones that were found were taken and buried at a cemetery, here it is advised that you just respectfully shove it back down, because prying beneath the surface could get you a whole lot more than you bargained for. This is what I'm pondering as I make my way along the old brick path leading to the house. It is slick. I can tell it would be easy to fall on. It is still light out, but the sunlight is dying. It'll be dark soon. I encounter this bronze deer. Pretty, but odd. I smell the fragrance of some flowers, but I'm not sure which ones. I stop to admire some. I'm nervous. I've never visited a real haunted house before. At least the Duff Green Mansion didn't really feel like one in the bright morning light. I know it won't be like some Halloween gimmicks. At least, I don't think so. They call it Mississippi's most haunted for a reason, I suppose. I don't know what to expect. I can always leave if it crosses any lines. I am early, so maybe I'll walk around the grounds a little bit. What is this? The old well? No way. What is that sound? Nope, I'm out. It's been raining the last few days and I really have no desire to find a bone sticking up or anything else for that matter. I'll wait for the tour. Our guide's dress is gorgeous, dark, elegant, and telling a story of its own. Andrew Glass was a highwayman. He was wanted up and down the Natchez Trace for robbery and murder. The Natchez Trace was an ancient pathway that had been used by animals and Native Americans for centuries until it finally developed into what was the main thoroughfare for the area. But don't assume this was something like a highway of today. It was a hiking trail, basically, and there were turns and valleys and trees and numbers of places prime for an ambush. And that's just what Andrew did. He would ride out with his gang and ambush travelers of every creed or status. When Andrew wasn't hunting on Natchez Trace, he frequented Walnut Hills. Walnut Hills was the town that would someday become Vicksburg. Now, the sheriff of Walnut Hills knew that Andrew Glass was a wanted man. However, Andrew wasn't worried about it because the sheriff was his brother. Who he was worried about was the French, because Walnut Hill happened to be in Spanish territory, but he would cross into French territory to commit his crimes. Now, apparently at some point, Andrew was offered $1,200, some gold, and some building materials in exchange for the assurance that he would mend his heinous ways, settle down, and live a respectable life. Or at least stop menacing people. He accepted the offer. He married a young woman, and in 1797, Andrew built what would become the first part of McRaven. For some perspective, in 1797, George Washington was still president. Now, Andrew didn't build a typical home. He basically built himself a hideout. What he did was he constructed two rectangles, one on top of the other. Now that wouldn't be so weird, but he put the kitchen on the bottom and the bedroom on the top, with no staircase. The bedroom was only accessible by ladder, which could be retracted, thus making it difficult for anyone to get near him. He would have a clear shot at anyone attempting it. You may realize by now that the only motivation for doing this is if Andrew had no intention of mending his ways. Andrew Glass continued riding off with his gang into French territory to maraud, terrorize, and plunder. His antics were finally put to rest when, during a confrontation with the French, he was shot in the stomach. Somehow, Andrew managed to get home. As he lay in bed, bleeding to death, his wife took a blade and slit him from ear to ear. It is theorized that her motivation for doing this was because his gang had told her about his dealings with women, and that they had told her knowing that she would retaliate and they could take his cut. It may have been coincidental that the French had weakened him for her attack. It is also theorized that she and his gang worked out a deal. They could take not only his current cut, but all of his money if they helped her avoid a murder charge. So they dismembered his body and buried pieces of it throughout the 1,200 acres. To this day, the 1797 portion of the McRaven house is said to be the darkest part of the house. Women report unwanted touch. Men report unexplained anger. People say they lose things or are pickpocketed. All types of ghost hunting equipment has been activated and in some cases ruined. As I stand here in Andrew's room, I'm a little jumpy about it. I'm imagining that somehow I'm going to turn around and be all alone in the house. For a moment, I am alone in the room. It has its own smell. A little musty, definitely that old smell. It's like everything modern falls away in here. I'm considering Andrew. He wasn't a very nice guy in life. I wonder what his wife was like. I guess he died right there. His kitchen is as full of sharp objects as we would imagine. Tools or weapons, a matter of semantics, really, or intentions. This room transports you in time. I can feel all the layers of the eras in here, like a vortex or time slip. Either way, it gives me that same feeling like upstairs where I'm just on the edge of being trapped, all alone in here. In the mid-1830s, the new 28-year-old Warren County Sheriff Stephen Howard purchased the land and the little house for his new bride, Mary Elizabeth. Mary was 12. It was said to have been a love match, but she was 12. Anyway, when she was 15, she became pregnant with the couple's first child. In 1836, Stephen Howard added on to the existing structure in the Empire style. Knowing that Mary would need a proper staircase, he added that, as well as a dining room and a second bedroom and a covered porch. Mary and Stephen were happy to start their family, and Mary was an excited, expectant mother. She gave birth to a healthy baby girl in that second room that her husband had built for her. But Mary did not seem to recover very quickly and declined into a fever. One day, when she was feeling a little better, she spent the afternoon holding her baby, counting fingers and toes and imagining first steps. Stephen was relieved. She seemed to be feeling so much better as he laid down next to her in the bed for that night. But when he woke in the morning, Mary was dead. Not knowing how to care for an infant, especially as a lawman, Stephen took the child to Mary's parents, perhaps sparing her from growing up on that property. He himself died only a few short years later. Mary is said to be the most active and sometimes playful ghost on the premises. Most of her room is still furnished with her belongings. This is her spinning wheel, the bed she died in, and her dresser set. Mostly she is reported to interact with children and expectant mothers. One young mother left the property abruptly during a tour when her toddler started playing with an invisible friend, spinning with one hand raised up in the air. The mother quickly picked up the child and walked out the door. The little girl looked over the mother's shoulder and said, "Bye-bye." People claim to have seen Mary in the window from out on the path. Lights turn on and off on their own, but supposedly she has a very specific calling card that she uses to communicate with tour guides. She opens and closes a cabinet door on her dresser. I didn't take hardly any video in the home because I prefer non-flash photography, but somehow I managed to get this. Yeah, she is showing out tonight. I'm an experienced theater tech. I'm that friend you don't want to take to the show if you don't want the tricks revealed. I'm kidding, I wouldn't do that. But I didn't notice any obvious mechanics. A couple of us even walked around the dresser. So In 1849, John and Selina Bob, yeah, let's just get that out of the way, John Bob. Anyway, John and Selina moved into the home. Desiring a little more space, added the third and final portion to the house in the Greek Revival style. They added a grand staircase, a third bedroom, a men's changing room, and a formal parlor. Both John and Selina had a love for flowers and roses, and John had planted and maintained about 16 acres of the most fragrant and beautiful roses you have ever seen. Visitors would often hear the sound of Selina playing the piano as they walked up the path. Then they would see John up on the balcony, enjoying his music, smoking his cigar.
This room has a softer feel, at least to me. Maybe it's the elegance, but there is a tilt in the floor, a subtle change as you walk. It's a little disorienting. I wish I could go out there. I can imagine Selina in this gown. It's gorgeous. I want to feel the fabric, but I won't.
John and Selina lived there happily until May 18th, 1863, when the siege began. John, being a proud, loyal Southerner, offered the home and the lands as a Confederate-only hospital. Before long, the rooms and halls were filled with the wounded and dying. The grounds became run over with tents and horse-drawn carriages hauling in the half-dead. John and Selina retreated to the safety of a dugout cellar beneath the home, while their beautiful roses were trampled and the house weathered the brutality of war. Just how many soldiers drew their last breath on the property, we will never know. Now, the hall dividing Mary and Andrew's rooms is a repository of crude surgical tools abandoned to the property to be picked up randomly or discovered over the years, sometimes by metal detector, other times by tripping on some strange metal hazard. Many of the bones on the McRaven property are undoubtedly severed limbs, but it seems there is at least one mass grave. Researchers brought in by the last owner-occupant of McRaven determined that there were many, many graves, as in 400 to 500 bodies. Now, how many of those were Confederate soldiers? Probably most, but how many of them might be Choctaw or Seminole people from the Trail of Tears? How many of them could be pieces of Andrew Glass? The grounds of McRaven will never give up their secrets, and that is why it is advised to just respectfully shove it back down. Because now you understand why prying below the surface may get you a whole lot more than you had bargained for. I'm not going to dive too deep into the stories of what has been seen on the grounds because it's numerous, but I will say that our guide for the evening told us she does not walk the property outside after dark. Spending time out there was not recommended. And I'm wondering if she's okay with what's in the house, then what's out there. But we've gotten away from the story of the Bobs, so let's go back to that. After the siege, John made progress on the many repairs and started to nurse his roses back to health. On the 1-year anniversary of the ending of the siege, he heard a ruckus, which turned out to be 3 drunken Union soldiers. Now, the witness to this event is either Selina or their nephew, or both. It doesn't really matter because the accounts are basically the same. John discovered these drunken hoodlums were picking and damaging his prized roses. When he yelled at them to stop, they yelled back, "You lost the war, and this is all ours now." Enraged, John picked up a brick and lobbed it at the men. Somehow, he hit one in the head and knocked him out. The two soldiers lifted their friend and, while retreating, screamed violent threats of revenge. The next day, John went to report the incident to the Union general, who assured him no soldier would risk court-martial to actually carry out one of those threats. John Bob returned home, but as he was coming down the path, he was accosted by 25 Union soldiers. They drug him to the edge of the property and began to beat him by the railroad tracks. Perhaps they just meant to rough him up, but in the fray, one of them shot him in the stomach. Doubling down on that, another one shot him in the face. Hearing the shots, Selena, fearing the worst, ran towards the sound, and as the soldiers fled, she arrived at the unrecognizable corpse of her beloved husband. It was in this state that the general, who came to check on them, found Selena wailing and covered in blood. John Bob was the first civilian casualty of the Union occupation. May 18th, 1864. I cannot tell you how or when Selena herself died, but many later occupants and visitors of McRaven hear her playing the piano, and they smell the smoke of John's cigar. Next up, the Murrays. You may be wondering by now if it ends, this cycle of tragedy after tragedy on the property. Nope, not yet. William Murray was a Yankee. He walked with a limp, and therefore he needed a cane. That's not really important to our story until he haunts the place and people hear his cane on the wooden floor. But before that, he had a family. Him and his wife had about 6 children. Over the years, the family lived and then died one by one in the home. Each time they lost a family member, it was the same routine. The women handled the wake, the men handled the burial. Finally, it was down to 2 sisters, Annie and Ella, and their brother, Harry, all of which were middle-aged by now. They had never married, and they had never moved away from the home. When Harry died, the sisters did what they knew they were supposed to do, and they held a wake for him. But they didn't know what to do with the body, so they just assumed someone would come and take it for burial. Eventually. Right? Well, 6 weeks later, their doctor arrived for their scheduled checkup, and as he entered through the door in the Mississippi heat, he knew there was a problem. But for the true gore of that story, you might just want to visit McRaven. Whether it was at this time or before, the sisters began to suffer from extreme hoarding disorder. Not only were the rooms full, but the halls began to be cluttered. When modern conveniences like electricity, plumbing, indoor bathrooms started to become available, they would not allow any in the home. Finally, in their old age, Ella started to decline. So their doctor recommended that she no longer use the steps. So Mary Elizabeth's bed was brought down into the dining room, and the 2 sisters slept there for the last 5 years of their life. When Ella died in 1960, Annie was unable to part with her, so Ella's body remained in the bed for the next 5 days before the doctor came and had both Ella and Annie removed from the home. Annie died shortly thereafter in a nursing home. The next owner of McRaven wisely did not live in it. They made it a tour home, and it was listed on the Register of Historical Places in 1979. Leland was the heir to the French's mustard empire, and he decided that he wanted to live in the home again. So he started buying antiques and bringing it into the home and gave historical tours. Things did not go well for him. He was initially a skeptic who dabbled in ways of communicating with spirits in order to discredit them. Things started to happen to him. He purchased a house down the street to sleep in when he was too afraid at night. Then, it seems, things turned violent. He claimed he was attacked 3 times. One occasion, something slammed his thumbs in a drawer as he opened it. Then, he changes tactics and calls out a priest. Despite this, one night when he was there all alone in the dining room, something shoved him so hard that he hit the ground and smashed his glasses into his face, requiring stitches. When he walked out of that emergency room, he left the city and never looked back. He didn't come back to claim a single item. He didn't come back to show the property. Nothing. The current owners were never so foolish as to live there. It is now one of the most beautiful and popular historic places to visit in Vicksburg.
At the end of the tour, I linger long enough to get some photos in the 1797 kitchen. When I come out, I pause to listen. Tree frogs way out in the property are calling for their lovers. The sound is mournful and demands my attention. Most of the guests have left quickly. It almost has a romantic feel on the patio looking out onto the grounds, but I'm not brave enough to go out there. The last group is getting ready to leave, so I decide I don't want to be left alone, and I head out ahead of them. The path is dimly lit, and it is slick, and I cannot help but feel as if it is a veiled threat.
So there you have it, my fellow inner children, a ghost tale to rival all ghost tales. But trust me, I left out a lot. So let me know in the comments if you want me to start a ghost docu-series. I'm joking. This was enough. Letting your inner child take you on an adventure and seeing what creative endeavors follow. So please like and subscribe. And if you liked this one, please be sure to check out this adventure. In the meantime, please be kind to yourself and others, and free your inner child.